Well, as you may be aware, I am selling this motor, and before I pull it out, disconnect it and pull it out, I'll do a compression test on it, just for the potential buyer out there so they know that this thing's still in good nick. Boy, I hope my battery lasts. That's about, I did cylinder 6, and that was coming in at 120 psi as well, so that seems to be about where it's sitting. So the F-motor's all loaded up on the hoist now. I got Rod coming over to pick it up, who's purchased it. Yeah, beautiful.
Oh, many thanks. We'll get out of your hair.
No problem at all, matey.
Thanks a lot.
My pleasure. Enjoy the old jig. Really exciting day for me today. I'm in the cruiser. I got the trailer on the back. I'm heading to Eagle Auto Spares to pick up a brand new crate LSA and a 6L90E 6-speed automatic box. So why don't you grab yourself a cold beverage, jump in the passenger seat here, and let's go on a drive together. So there's a little bit of a story with these LSAs apparently. As you may or may not be aware, they were in the HSVs and the GTSs and also in the Maloos. Now the Maloos were discontinued back in 16 and the GTSs were discontinued when Holden shut its doors about a year ago. So they ran out of body shells and they had approximately 290 of these LSA motors left over. So they handed them out to their dealer network, and they also sent some to some aftermarket suppliers, which is where I picked mine up at. And the dude said to me, when these HSV LSAs run out, that's it, they're gone. And to get an LSA, you're going to need to import it from the US. And his estimation is that when that happens, it will be about $10,000 more than what the current price is. So I'm kind of glad that I got in when I did, and I was able to pick up one of these HSV LSAs, which is just bloody awesome. 550 kilowatts, that's going to be some serious oompage to get that FJ Cruiser rolling along. Cannot wait for it. Look at that, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Is that a thing of beauty or what? Oh, yes. Well, to say that I'm excited about these two packages is an understatement. Look at me, I'm sweating with excitement. The first thing I'm going to do is bolt these motor mounts up to the LSA. They can either go that way or that way. I got a 50-50 shot. What's the chances of me getting that right? Get rid of that engine cover because I can see that getting in our road. Alright, that's sitting there now. At least it's not swinging and hanging. Now I'll bring our gearbox over and see whether I can slide that in situ. It's going to come pretty darn close to matching up at that height. Alright, I'll pull off this torque converter holder on her. Alright, I'm going to get my bell housing bolts all located, but I'm not going to crank them down tight because I've got to spin that torque converter in there. So I am in luck. I have been able to do up the torque converter bolts, and there's 6 of them in there. Now on these torque converter bolts, I've just put a little bit of red Loctite, not a lot, and I've torqued them down to 44 foot-pounds. And that's it. All 6 of them run in and done. And now I've got to torque the bell housing bolts, and they are 37 foot-pounds. That's it. Torqued down. Ah, feels good to get that on. What are you talking to? Just keep going. All right, we're mobile. Now I can play around with these engine mounts and probably get them wrong. Now, before I go ahead and try and fit this motor to the chassis, I have to fit these accessories. And this particular one is the AC. And the reason that I want to fit these accessories now is I want to make sure I don't have any clearance issues with any component on the chassis. She mounts like that. See, and look at that. The back of that compressor, he's already fouling that engine mount. So that's exactly the reason that I want to do this sort of stuff now, is make sure that I get these things sorted out now while it's easy to access. So I've swapped the mounts around from the left side to the right side, and I think that is our clearance issue sorted. That mount is now fouling the bottom of the manifold. So let's just say, for the sake of the argument, that's where it goes. Does that sort our air compressor issue out? Yes, air conditioning compressor does not foul now. So I think I just need to recess a little bit on the top of this mount to clear the manifold, and we'll be good as gold. So I messaged Billy McKinnon, and he confirmed that these mounts do indeed go here in that location. I had to rebate this or modify it slightly. I had to take off about 1 millimeter just so that that would clear the exhaust manifold. But we've done that, and that works fine now, so it can be run home. And look at that. That hole is even large enough to get a socket through there. Now I'm going to mount the starter in here. Look at the size of this thing. It's just tiny. Anyway, I'll mount that in there. There's a little plate that covers here that I've got in the mail, so it's not here yet. So this will just be a temporary mounting. Now here's something I've learned to do a long time ago because I've got such a feeble memory. Anything that's mounted temporarily, I usually put a little bit of high-vis rope or high-vis cord or a little bit of tape or something to identify that that is not mounted in there permanently. Now I've got a complete drive pulley and accessory kit that mounts on the front of this motor, but the only thing that sits outboard is the alternator, which mounts here. So I'll mount that up, then I'll do the rest of these drive pulleys once it's in the chassis. So I just don't want to potentially damage them with the straps, with my lifting straps, or who knows if I drop the engine and bloody bang it on the side of the chassis. So alternator only, and that is her. Okay, alternator bracket, and the alternator fits in like that. This big long puppy on the bottom, and that puppy there, and that puppy there. All torqued down. Hey, look at this, ladies and gentlemen. We're getting some progress. This sucker's ready to go up on the hoist and in between the chassis rails. I had another rookie question that Billy McKinnon was able to help me out with. These locating pins here on our body mounts, they go towards the motor. So we'll pop those onto the engine side just loosely before I lift that motor up and drop it in. Here's the challenge I've got. I got to go back a bit further. That strap's hitting the firewall already. We're just touching the steering box there. And on this side, she's all good and clear. So I think what I'll do is I'll go underneath and I'll jack that gearbox up from the bottom and then disconnect that green strap to allow me to go back further. Well, after a fair bit of finagling, I've got the donk sitting in there. I had to pull that exhaust manifold off on that side. It was just hitting the steering box. This side over here, plenty of clearance. Gearbox is sitting in there okay. I got to get the angle of the dangle right, but I won't bolt up that transfer case until I get those motor mounts in situ. Now I've established what I need to do here. This fish plate here, I'm going to rebate it about 30 mil so that it sort of sections around the post here that holds the steering box. That will get this body mount into the center of this fish plate. terms of where the motor's positioned, I don't know whether you can see that or not, but it's about 70 mil from the back of the firewall to the back of that rocker cover. And that's not bad, because up here I got my radiator support panel just sitting there. So the radiator is obviously going to sit in there. That still leaves me a good 110 mil fitted intercooler in between the pulleys and that radiator support panel. So that's pretty bloody good. The only really close bit is between the air conditioning compressor and the frame rail here. And I have got about 8 mil of clearance between those two. So I'm hoping that that doesn't cause me any grief, especially when you're into the motor and it's torquing within the body mounts. I hope that sucker doesn't catch that frame at all. Because of that, I might actually even box that out a little bit, just to give me a bit more clearance. Because I'd hate to have to friggin' do that after I got the motor all in place. Alright, I got my fish plate rebated here. And that is ready to be welded in place. Now I won't fully weld that because you don't want to weld across the chassis. It weakens the chassis. So I'll do a bit of run here, a little run here, run along the top, here and here. And of course we've got the circle here in the middle as well. There, we just got that clamp to hold her in place. Okay, time to take stock of where I'm at. I've got these fish plates welded in now on both sides. The mounts are not welded to the fish plates yet. That's next. There's the other side welded in. And what I also am going to have to do is notch out the frame here to clearance this air conditioning compressor. The motor as it sits now is roughly at about the level it needs to be. The gearbox is centered roughly left to right and about the right height at the back. So here's the section that I'm going to have to notch out. There, there. Okay, I got both my mounts welded in. I'll show you that once I clean them up a little bit, but the next step I'm going to do is chop out that piece there so that I can box this in to clearance that air conditioning compressor. Why don't I just use the piece I just cut out? That's made to fit in there perfectly. That's a much better idea. Way to go, brain. Sometimes I even surprise myself. Pop that there so we don't get spatter all over my freshly painted bits. Well, I've got the engine in the free and clear. I've got that little protective plate out of a wrecker. So I'll just whap that in there now. Beautiful. Beautiful. Now we'll cut this string off to indicate it's all good to go. Time to clean the gun up and then put the engine back where it belongs for good. Okay, just gotta line up our engine mount and we're done. And that looks pretty good. On down, baby. All right, the motor is in and bolted down. So that is what the clearance looks like on the air conditioning, which is perfect. There's our motor mount and the clearance that it's got to the steering box. I'm yet to put the exhaust manifold on here, but I think it will probably foul with that steering box. So I think I'm going to have to go with a custom setup there. The radiator sits in this support, obviously, which gives me a little bit of room between the motor and the radiator, about 100 mil or so for an intercooler. And over here on the passenger side, there's no clearance issues at all. Plenty of room between the alternator and the chassis. And there's our motor mounts there welded in place. Sweet. All right, motor's down. Step 1. Step 2, I got to install the cross member for that transmission. That's going to be for another day though. It's beer o'clock. Bye, Felicia. I watched a little bit of my video footage over the last couple of days. I have to apologize. It hasn't been quite as interactive as what it normally is. And I put that down to the fact that I've been having to do a lot of thinking when I've been doing this fabrication. And when I think, I can't interact. In fact, I can't do two things at once of anything. Now, I ran out of gas on my MIG, so I've got to go down to the shop and get a new bottle before I can continue to fab up the transmission cross member. So we'll see in a little bit. Here's a bit of good news. I was able to fit the factory exhaust manifold on once I had the motor in situ. I just had to bring it up from underneath. And if you look at our steering box, it's hard to tell in the photos, but I've got about 10 or 15 mil clearance there, and that's the tightest spot. And that's clearance on the heat shield. If I were to take the heat shield off, there's probably about 20 mil clearance there. So that is friggin' awesome. I'm glad I don't have to dick around with making or fabbing up a manifold of my own. So I'm at a point now where I can do the transmission cross member, but rather than this cab getting in the road while I'm doing that, I'll lift it off, set it on the back of the chassis, and that'll give me a clear run. At least now I know it fits in the transmission tunnel, no worries. Once I put the transfer case on the back of this, I suspect I'm probably going to have to notch the floor out a little bit. But anyway, get the cab out of the road so that I can center up this, put the transmission cross member in. Now I'll pop the ratchet strap around this so I can suspend it. So this flat here goes here. So basically that part of the transfer case kind of moves down a little bit, you know what I mean? What I'm not sure about is whether it's going to foul that or not. So we'll have to lift it in place, and if it does foul that, then I'll have to lower this transmission down a little bit further.
To me, it looks like it will right now.
It does look like it, yeah. And there's two locating dowels here, so that should help the cause a little bit.
Can I lift it or?
Yeah, so that's what we're gonna have to do. We'll have to lift it. And it's not that heavy.
But as we lift, we're gonna have to pivot it that way.
Correct, exactly, mate. So I can grab this side and do the pivoting. We got it, mate.
Nice.
Okay, if you let go. Yeah,
sure.
She stayed. Nice. Lovely work.
Oh, good.
Now I've got to affix this cross member, this transmission cross member. And I got from McKinnon's Cruisers these plates, which weld on to either side of the chassis, like so. And then they bolt through the transmission cross member. But before I can do any of that, I need to determine where this thing is meant to sit. I think I've only got two things that I need to worry about. One is left to right, and the second one is up and down. Now the left to right should be pretty easy. I should just be able to center it right down the center line of the chassis, and then just double check that this pinion lines up with the diff. And it looks like it does by eyeballing it, but I'll have to run a string line down there just to make sure. So that'd be my left and right considerations. My up and down considerations are a little bit more tricky as far as I can tell. Now ideally I'd like to bring this transmission up as far as I can until this cross member here sits up flush against the bottom. The thing that will be stopping me in the upward direction is the cab, and the floor of the cab in particular, I believe, is going to interfere with the top of this transfer case. So that means that I'm going to have to want to force it down as far as I can to clearance the floor. So those are my two considerations on an up and down from a cross member perspective. And then of course I've got the pinion angle as well to take into account. I got myself one of these fancy little, I guess, digital inclinometers, and it's got a magnetic base, so that just sticks on like that. And I can read that at the moment that's at 1.45 degrees, and that is in a downward direction. I do the exact same thing on the diff end, measure the angle there, And ideally, I'd like the diff angle to cancel this angle out. So this is 1.4 degrees down. If that diff is 1.4 degrees up, that's sweet. Then I got a net 0 degree angle between the two pinions. I believe I can have sort of a maximum of 3 to 5 degrees between the two. So that is also going to dictate my up and down. So, where did I land with this whole bloody consideration? I think to start off with, I'll move the tub back in place. I'll drop this down so that it doesn't interfere with the tub, and I'll slowly jack it up until it just touches the bottom of the tub. And then I'll see what sort of a gap I've got here between the cross member and the chassis rail. If there's a massive gap, then I'm gonna have to clearance the bottom of the tub. That's all there is to it. I suspect that's what's gonna happen. But that's the mental gymnastics that I'm going through at the moment, just trying to work out left to right and up to down. And those are the constraints that I've got to work with. So I dropped the gearbox and the transfer case down, popped the cab on, and jacked it up until it had about 20 mil clearance from the floor. And when I did that, this cross member sits, I'll call it 50 or 60, probably 60 mil down too far. Now these are the plates from McKinnon's Cruisers. I could fabricate new plates, pop them on there, and then just increase the height of them so that they actually cover over the chassis. And that would mean that I wouldn't have to modify the floor of the tub. However, let's have a look at our diff angle. That one is 4.4 degrees facing down. The diff is another 1 degree. So that means it's 5.4 degrees difference of an angle between the pinion on the back of the transfer case and the pinion on the diff. That's too much in my estimation, which means I will have to jack this transfer case up. I may as well jack it up all the way so that that cross member touches the base of the frame, because I've got to clearance the floor on the tub anyway. Unfortunately, I'm just not going to be able to get around that. So that's what I'll do. I'll jack it back up so that that cross member is touching the base of the frame, and then I'll recheck my angles, my pinion angle, and see whether they make sense or not. All right, I'll jack this transfer case and transmission up until that cross member hits the bottom of the frame, and I will drop it about 10 mil because there's a rivet underneath here, and I'd rather not have to grind the head of that rivet off, and I don't see any reason why I should, because when that is welded to the frame with about 10 mil clearance there for the rivet head, still plenty of area to be able to get a nice weld on, and that cross member will be fine. So let me check the pinion angle on that transfer case and on the diff. 2.95 degrees up, and you are 2.7 degrees down. So that means I got 0.2 degrees, 2.75. So that means I've got 0.2 degrees difference between those two. That's pretty bloody good. I'm gonna call that. That is the height we'll pop that transfer case and that cross member, and that means I've got to clearance that floor out, and there's just no way around that. But that diff angle and the pinion angle on both of those is freaking awesome. So I'll lock that in. Now the brackets that the transmission cross member are bolted to are welded in. Now that that's finished, I'll jack the cross member up so that it's sitting flush with these plates, mark the holes, and drill the holes into the cross member to bolt it in place. Now I've got the transmission cross member all bolted in place. I didn't film it only because it was just a lot of measuring, you know, a little bit left, a little bit right, a little bit here, a little bit there. It doesn't make for a very riveting scene. Last step here is I'll shoot that transmission cross member with a little bit of 2-pack epoxy. Etch prime first, then 2-pack epoxy. And that's it. We've got our engine in place. Hopefully, never ever to come out again. The next challenge is to get the tub to fit over top of that transfer case and transmission. But I'm very happy the way that that turned out. And those engine mounts and transmission cross member, bloody quality unit from McKinnon's Cruisers. So thank you for that, Billy. There's our cross member brackets, welded up, painted, everything's in place, and she's looking good. Next step for me is to move this tub back into place here, get the angle grinder out, and start to clearance it for this transfer case and gearbox. But you know what? I'm tired. It's beer o'clock. I'll catch you guys next time around. Thanks for watching, everybody. Keep the shiny side up. Bye now.